Welcome to the monthly PolitIQ Game Show Challenge, the only game show where you can prove that you know politics. Today's three contestants have worked their way to the top of the monthly PolitIQ leaderboard by correctly answering the most number of questions related to the hot topics of politics. Let's meet our contestants. Joining us from Chicago, we have Tim. Say hi, Tim. Also from Chicago, we have Kelly.
Hey.
And finally from Rhode Island, we have Chris.
What up?
All right, so now let's take a look at the categories of the game, starting with which candidate, in which every single answer is a current presidential candidate running for president, which president, in which every answer is a either current or previous U.S. president, U.S. and the world, in which every answer is a country, surprising stats, in which every answer is related to a surprising statistic, and then major headlines from the month of July. Let's get started. Tim, go ahead and choose the first category.
I'm going to go with which candidate for 500.
All right, which candidate was the first to drop out of the Democratic primaries after struggling to raise money even in his home state of California? The correct answer is Eric Swalwell. All right. That brings us to Tim. You can go ahead and choose the next category again.
Let's go which president 500.
Which president signed the Budget Control Act, which set strict spending caps enforced with automatic spending cuts? And Tim, you were the first to buzz in. What do you think?
Go President Bush.
That is incorrect. Chris, you're the second to buzz in. What do you think?
Bill Clinton.
That is also incorrect. Kelly?
Ronald Reagan.
Again, incorrect. The correct answer was President Obama. All right, Kelly, which category would you like to choose?
Do major headlines for 100.
A federal judge ruled that President Trump and members of Congress could not block users on what social media platform as it is considered unconstitutional? And Tim, you were the first to buzz in. What do you think?
I'm going to go with Twitter.
That is correctamundo. Twitter. All right, Tim, what's the next category?
Let's go which president 400.
Which president was in office the last time a citizenship question was included on the national census? And Tim?
Nixon.
That is incorrect. Chris, you were the second to buzz in.
Truman.
Correct. The issue of adding a citizenship question was a hot topic in the news over the month of July due to the Trump administration's repeated attempts to add it. However, ultimately, they were forced by the Supreme Court to remove the question. Chris, the game board is yours. Which category would you like to choose?
U.S. and the world for 5.
President Trump issued the third veto of his presidency this month in order to push through a controversial $8 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia and what other country? Tim?
Yemen.
Incorrect. Chris?
Turkey.
That is also incorrect. The correct answer is United Arab Emirates.
Right.
Tim, which category would you like to choose?
Let's go which candidate for 400.
All right. Which candidate predicted the 2008 economic crash and is currently warning of another upcoming economic crisis? And Chris, what do you think?
Yang.
Incorrect. Kelly, you're the second to buzz in. What do you think?
Bernie Sanders.
That is also incorrect. And finally, Tim.
I'm going to go with Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe is also incorrect. Come on, guys. The Harvard economics professor, Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Chris to choose the next category.
Let's go with major headlines for 5.
Which state passed legislation this month requiring presidential candidates to disclose their tax returns in order to appear on the ballot? Hint, the state also passed a bill extending health care to young illegal immigrants. Tim?
California.
That is correct.
Hey.
Trump and the RNC have since sued the state of California, arguing that this move is unconstitutional. Tim, you got that last question correct, so go ahead and choose the next category.
Which candidate? 300.
Which candidate is a billionaire and major Democratic donor who was the latest to announce his candidacy, during which he pledged to spend $100 million of his own money on his campaign? And Tim.
Tom Steyer.
That is correct. All right, so Tim, the board is yours. What's the next category?
Which candidate? 200.
Which candidate made headlines when it was announced that her campaign, funded entirely through grassroots effort, recently raised $19.1 million, making it the most successful grassroots effort in U.S. history? And Tim.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yep, that is correct. She ranks third in fundraising for the second quarter and is refusing to accept money from any super PAC, separate PAC, or lobbyist group. All right, Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
Which president for 3?
All right, which president referred to Africans as monkeys during a taped conversation over the phone with Richard Nixon, which was made public this month? And Chris, you're the first to buzz in.
Ronald Reagan.
That is correct. He also was opposed to the Civil Rights Act and making MLK Day a national holiday, and he actively tried to weaken the Voting Rights Act and numerous other civil rights legislation. All right, Chris, you got that one correct, so go ahead and choose the next category.
Surprising stats for 500.
Scientists expressed alarm after discovering over 100 blank in the Arctic Circle this month, which is unprecedented. Tim, you were the first to buzz in. What do you think?
Polar bears.
Incorrect. I would say polar bears in the Arctic Circle is pretty precedented. Kelly.
I'm going to go with Siberian tigers.
That is also incorrect. Chris, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, why not? Flamingos.
Flamingos, surprisingly, although that would certainly be unprecedented, is also incorrect. The correct answer is wildfires. Over 100 wildfires have been spreading in the Arctic Circle this month.
That was alarming.
That is pretty alarming.
Surprising statistics there, Connor. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so with that, we've come to the halfway point. The scores are as follows. In first place, at 1,100 points, we have Tim. Second place with 700 points, Chris. And in a close third place with 0 points, Kelly. So let's take a moment and meet our contestants. Starting with first place, Tim. Tim, what do you think is the most important political issue facing the country today?
I think the most important political issue facing our country are the ongoing attempts at undermining our Constitution and our democracy being carried out by the current administration.
Sounds good. All right, Chris, if you could grab a beer with any politician, who would it be and why?
Mitch, so that I could punch him in the face.
All right, I'll allow it. And finally, Kelly, if you were elected president, what would your first executive order be?
I would say to change the campaign finance laws.
All right, good answer. All right, so with that, we're going to jump into round 2 of the game. And again, in this round, contestants will be deducted points if they answer incorrectly, so be sure not to buzz in if you are unsure or do not know the answer to a question. So we're going to open the leaderboard up, or the game board up, to Tim, who's in first place. So Tim, which category would you like to choose?
Major headlines, 400.
What dropped to 2.1% in the second quarter of 2019, down from 3.1% in the first quarter of this year, and the lowest under the Trump administration? And Tim, you're the first to buzz in.
The unemployment rate.
That is incorrect. Chris.
Job growth rate.
Close, but also incorrect.
Oh, damn it.
The correct answer is GDP growth. All right. I'm going to open it up to Kelly to choose the next category.
Oh. I'm going to go with major headlines for 300.
In July, Congress finally passed a bipartisan bill providing extended financial support to first responders for their medical costs associated with what major event? Tim,
9/11.
that is correct.
I actually knew that one.
Comedian Jon Stewart helped gain national attention when he appeared in Congress and on multiple news sites, sort of berating congressmen for their continued inaction over the bill. All right. Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
Headlines for 200.
An analysis by the U.S. Department of Agriculture found that Trump's tax reform would overwhelmingly benefit America's blank farmers. So what? All right, Chris, you buzzed in first. What do you think?
Soybean.
Incorrect. Kelly,
Cattle.
also incorrect. The correct answer is wealthiest, and I understand that that's a little bit misleading of a question. But very similar to the overall effect of the tax reform bill, it would overwhelmingly benefit the wealthiest farmers at the expense of the poorest. All right, Tim, I'm going to head and open the game board up to you to choose the next category.
President for 200.
Which president warned that a growing military-industrial complex is a major threat to American democracy in his final address to the nation? And Tim, the U.S. history teacher, appropriately raised his hand first. So what do you think?
Eisenhower.
That is correct. Didn't even need the hint that he was a 5-star general. Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
President for 100.
Which president saw their approval rating among Republicans increase by 5% the week after making a series of racist attacks against multiple congresswomen of color? And Kelly.
Donald Trump.
That is correct. The specific attacks began when he tweeted telling the 4 members of the Democratic caucus in the House, known as the Squad, to go back to where they came from, which has long been considered a racist slur. Kelly, go ahead and choose the next category.
Surprising statistics for 400.
Although total drug overdose deaths across the U.S. declined in the last year, the number of deaths from blank increased by 21%, far above any other drug, while seizures of the substance doubled over the same time. And Kelly, you're the first to buzz in.
Opioids.
That is incorrect. Chris, what do you think?
Is it like synthetic marijuana?
That is also incorrect.
I think it's
And Tim,
Meth.
meth is correct.
Dang.
As although national attention has focused on opioids, rightfully so, due to the opioid epidemic, methamphetamines have drastically increased in production and seizures around the country. Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
Surprising stats for 300.
The number of migrants traveling north through Mexico in July blank by 39%. Kelly.
Decreased.
That is correct. This has been attributed to Mexico's increased enforcement efforts and also increased financial aid to Central America, where a majority of these migrants have been coming from. All right, Kelly, the game board is yours. Go ahead and choose the next category.
Do stats for 200.
According to a recent study of 900 fatal police shootings that have occurred since 2015, the majority of victims, 55%, were what race? And Kelly, you're the first to buzz in. What do you think?
African American.
I'm sorry, but that is incorrect. Tim,
White.
that is correct. 27% of the victims were Black, 19% Hispanic. 90% of those who were shot in these fatal police shootings were armed, and another 90% were also found to be attacking the officer at the time. All right, Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
Rising stats for 100.
A nonpartisan government report found that increasing this by about $8 would boost incomes for over 17 million Americans, but also lead to a job loss of 1.3 million jobs. Chris, you're the first to buzz in.
Minimum wage.
Yep. Just to provide context, the current federal minimum wage has not increased since 2009, I believe, and it is currently $7.25 an hour. All right. Chris, go ahead and choose the next category.
U.S. and the world for 400.
Which country is a key member of NATO but has been recently strengthening ties with Russia, which includes a massive purchase of anti-aircraft missiles from Russia? And Chris, what do you think?
China.
Incorrect. Tim,
Turkey.
that is correct. In response to the massive arms sale with Turkey, President Trump threatened economic sanctions on Turkey, but those have yet to come to fruition. All right, Tim, go ahead and choose the next category.
U.S. and the world for 300.
Foreign investment in the U.S. from what major country has decreased by 90% in the last 2 years? Chris.
China.
That is correct. Chinese foreign direct investment in the U.S. dropped from a peak of $46.5 billion in 2016 to $5.4 billion in 2018, due in large part to the slowing economy in China, but also President Trump's ongoing trade war with the country. Chris, go ahead and choose the next category.
U.S. and the world for 2.
All right. Leaked communications from this country's ambassador to the U.S. describe President Trump as inept, insecure, and incompetent, resulting in that ambassador being forced to step down earlier this month. Chris.
Is it the UK?
Yep, that is correct. And Chris, go ahead and choose the next category.
U.S. and the world 100.
President Trump made history earlier this month after becoming the first sitting president to step foot in what country? And Chris.
North Korea.
Yes, that is correct. Most recently, Trump announced that he received another handwritten letter from Kim Jong-un, opening another possibility of continued dialogue with him directly, which would make the third time that the two world leaders have met to discuss nuclear disarmament. The final category, which candidate for 100? Which candidate raised the most amount of money in the second quarter of 2019, but has struggled to gain support among African Americans? Tim.
Bernie Sanders.
That is incorrect. Anyone else? The correct answer is Pete Buttigieg, who raised an impressive $24 million in the second quarter, but is currently polling at 0% support among African Americans. All right, and that brings us to the final round. Before we get there, I just want to go over the score totals. In first place, Tim with 2,100 points. Second place, Chris with 0. And third place, Kelly with negative 400. In the final round, I will ask 3 questions. Each answer is worth 500 points, and there's no penalty for incorrect answers. Which number corresponds to all of the following statements? The number of states not targeted by Russian election interference in 2016, the total number in miles of new border wall constructed under the Trump administration, and the number of bills regarding election security Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has allowed for a vote in the last 3 years. The national debt recently reached a new milestone, due in large part to increased defense spending and a loss in revenue from corporate tax cuts. To the nearest $1 trillion, approximately what is the current federal debt? President Trump's approval rating has reached an all-time high in July. What is it? And I will give you guys a window of approximately 2%. So for the first question, the correct answer is 0. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has brought 0 bills regarding election security to the Senate floor. All 50 states were targeted by Russian election interference, and 0 miles of new border wall have been constructed under the Trump administration, although a few miles of fencing that was previously in place has been reinforced. The correct answer to the second question is $22 trillion. The current national federal debt is $22 trillion, which no one answered correctly. And finally, the third question, President Trump's approval rating reached a high of 44% in July. And the only person to answer that correctly is also Tim. So Tim walks away with an additional 1,000 points, making his total 3,100 points. Chris with 0, and Kelly gets 100 points.
Points, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. Taking home that number 2.
That brings us to the final question, where contestants are able to wager all of their points, with the exception of Chris, who has nothing to wager. Chris, we'll just go ahead and pretend that you have 1 point, so you feel like you're included. Final question. 2020 presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders recently joined numerous other Democrats in calling for the abolition of this, after a recent report found that Donald Trump could lose the popular vote in 2020 by over 5 million votes and still be reelected. All right. So we have answers starting with Tim, who wagered 2,800 out of his 3,100 points and correctly answered the Electoral College, which leaves Tim with a final score of 5,900 points. Kelly also answered correctly and wagered 100 of her 100 points, so she ends with a score of 200. And Chris also answered correctly the Electoral College, and I'm going to assume wagered the 1 point that he was provided by the generous host, ending with a score of 2. In first place with a whopping 5,900 points is Tim. So Tim, congratulations on winning the month of July PolitIQ challenge. Kelly comes in a close second place with 200 points, followed by Chris in a even closer third place with 2 points. If you want a chance to compete in next month's PolitIQ challenge or win money every week, go to whatsmypolitiq.com and create a free profile. New quizzes are added daily and expire at the end of the month.